a country that existed for just one day. This is the Republic of Indian Stream, and yes, it was real. At first glance, you might think someone just made a mistake on a map. But here's the confusing part. For over 50 years, nobody actually knew whether this tiny patch of land between New Hampshire and Canada belonged to the United States or Britain. So the 300 people living there just said, "Fine, we'll be our own country." Let me explain how borders have gotten so confusing throughout history that people literally had to invent new nations just to deal with the chaos. The Republic of Indian Stream. So why did a tiny settlement declare independence from both America and Britain? The answer goes back to 1783. When the Treaty of Paris ended the American Revolution, it was supposed to draw a clear border between the US and British Canada. But there was a catch. The treaty said the border should follow the northwesternmost head of the Connecticut River. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Nobody could agree on which tributary counted as the actual head of the river. For decades, both countries claimed the area. New Hampshire tried to tax the residents. Canada tried to arrest them. The locals got so fed up that in 1832, they declared themselves the Republic of Indian Stream. They wrote their own constitution, elected their own government, and operated as an independent nation for about 3 years. Eventually, New Hampshire sent in the militia and forced them back into the United States. But for a brief moment in history, there was a fourth country in North America, created entirely because a border was too confusing to figure out. The Korean DMZ time warp. Now let's jump to the Korean Peninsula for one of the most confusing borders still active today. The demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. You probably know it's one of the most heavily guarded borders in the world. But here's the weird part. If you cross from South Korea into North Korea, you don't just change countries. You also travel back in time. Here's why. In 2015, North Korea decided to create its own time zone called Pyongyang time, setting their clocks 30 minutes behind South Korea and Japan. Their reasoning? Japan had forced Korea to use Tokyo time during its colonial occupation. So, North Korea changed it back to reclaim their independence. The problem is, South Korea didn't follow. That means if it's noon in Seoul, it's 11:30 a.m. in Pyongyang, even though they're less than 200 kilometers apart. It gets even messier. The border itself was drawn in 1953 along the 38th parallel, but it's not actually a straight line. It zigzags based on where the fighting stopped during the Korean War. In some places, the two sides are just meters apart. In others, there are entire villages caught in between. One of them, Panmunjom, is split down the middle. You can literally stand with one foot in each country. It's a border so confusing that even time itself can't agree on what's happening. The Sultanate of Muscat and Oman's split personality. Next up, we're heading to the Arabian Peninsula in the 1800s for what might be the most schizophrenic country in history. The Sultanate of Muscat and Oman. Wait, wasn't that just Oman? Not back then. For over a century, Muscat and Oman were technically the same country, but also not really. Here's the deal. In 1856, when the Sultan of Muscat and Oman died, the British stepped in to settle a dispute between his two sons. Their solution? Split the country in two. One son got the coastal region of Muscat, the other got the interior region of Oman. But instead of drawing a clean border, the British just sort of left it vague. Muscat controlled the coast and the profitable trade routes. Oman controlled the inland tribes and deserts. For decades, the two operated almost like separate countries, with different rulers, different laws, and constant arguments over where one ended and the other began. Travelers could cross from Muscat into Oman without even realizing it because there was no clear line. It wasn't until 1970 that the two were officially reunified into the single country of Oman we know today. But for over 100 years, it was a border that didn't exist on maps, but somehow divided an entire nation. The Fergana Valley's border madness. Let's head to Central Asia for what is hands down one of the most confusing border situations ever created. The Fergana Valley, shared by Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. If you look at a map, it looks like someone spilled a jigsaw puzzle and gave up trying to put it back together. Here's what happened. Back in the 1920s, the Soviet Union controlled this entire region. Stalin wanted to divide it up to prevent any one ethnic group from becoming too powerful. So, Soviet planners drew borders that intentionally cut through communities, splitting up the Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, and Tajiks in the most chaotic way possible. The result is a patchwork of enclaves and exclaves that makes no sense. Uzbekistan has bits of land completely surrounded by Kyrgyzstan. Tajikistan has chunks trapped inside Uzbekistan. And inside some of those enclaves, there are even smaller pieces belonging to other countries. To get from one part of your own country to another, you might have to cross 2 or 3 international borders. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, these random lines suddenly became real national borders with checkpoints, visas, and guards. Today, locals have to navigate this maze daily. Farmers might own land in one country but live in another. Roads that used to take 10 minutes now require hours of border crossings. It's Stalin's mess, frozen in time, and it remains one of the most confusing borders on Earth. The Indiana-Kentucky border that moves on its own. Now let's jump to the United States for a border that refuses to stay in one place. The boundary between Indiana and Kentucky. On most maps, borders are fixed, but this one keeps moving. Here's why. The border is supposed to follow the Ohio River. Specifically, it follows the north bank of the river, as it was in 1792 when Kentucky became a state. But here's the problem. Rivers don't sit still. The Ohio River has shifted, flooded, and changed course dozens of times over the past 200 years. When the river moves, it creates confusion. Is the border the current riverbank? Or is it the old one from 1792? Courts have ruled that the border stays on the old riverbank, even if the river moves. That means there are chunks of Indiana that are now south of the river, technically on the Kentucky side of the water. And there are bits of Kentucky north of the river, on the Indiana side. This has caused endless legal headaches. Who has jurisdiction over crimes committed on these isolated patches? Which state collects taxes? Which state's laws apply? In some cases, people have built houses on land that switched states without them realizing it. It's a border that history set in stone, but geography keeps rewriting. The Cooch Behar Enclave's Nightmare. Finally, let's head to South Asia for what used to be the most complicated border situation in modern history. Until 2015, the border between India and Bangladesh was home to over 160 enclaves, pieces of one country completely surrounded by the other. But it gets better. Inside some of those enclaves were counter-enclaves. Pieces of India inside Bangladesh, inside India. And in one case, there was even a counter-counter enclave. Bangladesh, inside India, inside Bangladesh, inside India. This insanity came from 18th century wars between local kings. When the kings gambled, they'd bet villages and territories like poker chips. Winners would get random patches of land scattered everywhere. When India and Pakistan were partitioned in 1947, and later when Bangladesh split from Pakistan in 1971, all those scattered territories got locked into place as official borders. The result was chaos. People born in an Indian enclave inside Bangladesh couldn't legally enter India without crossing through Bangladesh first, which required passports they couldn't get because they were technically already in India. Some enclaves had no electricity, no police, no government services. Because neither country wanted to take responsibility. Children couldn't go to school. Sick people couldn't reach hospitals. In 2015, India and Bangladesh finally swapped territories and cleaned up the mess. Residents were allowed to choose which country they wanted to belong to. It was one of the largest peaceful land swaps in history. But for nearly 70 years, it was a border so confusing that entire communities were trapped in legal limbo. The Pheasant Island Timeshare. Let's wrap up with one of the strangest border solutions in history. Pheasant Island, a tiny piece of land in the river between France and Spain. Most borders stay put. This one doesn't. Every 6 months, it changes countries. Here's how it works. In 1659, France and Spain signed the Treaty of the Pyrenees on this island. To keep things fair, they agreed to share it. From February to July, it belongs to Spain. From August to January, it belongs to France. It's been swapping back and forth like this for over 350 years, making it the world's oldest condominium. The island itself is uninhabited. There's nothing there except a small monument. But technically, it's the only place on Earth where you can watch a border change countries twice a year without anyone lifting a finger. It's proof that when borders get too confusing, sometimes the only solution is to just take turns. Borders aren't just lines on a map. They're accidents, arguments, and compromises that got frozen in time. From a country that lasted 3 years because nobody could agree on a river, to a valley carved up by Stalin, to an island that plays ping pong between two nations. History is full of borders so confusing that people had to invent entirely new solutions just to make sense of them. They remind us that the lines we draw on maps are way messier than they look, and there are plenty more stories like these still out there. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like the video and hit subscribe for more explainer content. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.